I want you to know as I share this message in front of me, I still have printed out our entire church directory. I see your names and your faces, and I'm thinking about you as I share this message. An amazing story. We've been encouraging folks to get deep into the Gospel of John in the season that heads up toward Easter in Lent, to read in John. And I want to preach on one of those stories from this week's readings that's an amazing story. We've talked about how the Gospel of John is unique against the other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And that is never so true as at this particular point, because the other Gospels tell a story of Jesus at the Last Supper. It's why most churches celebrate communion, as Jesus gave bread and wine and said to the disciples, "This is my body and my blood." Well, sometimes when I teach young people in a confirmation setting, I will challenge them to find that story in John. I'll pull out a $20 bill and I'll say, whoever can find it gets the 20. And they're madly ripping through their Bibles, looking in John, trying to find it, but it's not there. John chooses not to tell that story and instead tells one that isn't in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. I should note that John does, in the 6th chapter, describe some things that are very communion-like. But late in the story, he chooses this description instead. And that's what I want to get into today. So it's found in John, the 13th chapter, starting at verse 1. Now, before the festival of the Passover, so this is literally the day before Jesus heads off to the cross, the very same timeline as Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and to go to the Father. He knows that he is headed to the cross. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it in the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. This is the third time that Judas is mentioned, and each and every time, John points out that Judas was the one who would betray him. He leaves no doubt that this is coming for Jesus, and it was Judas who did it. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, he got up from the table, took off his outer robe. Literally, he laid it down. And that's the same word he will use multiple times to say he will lay down his life. And he tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. Now, we don't realize in our society how completely inappropriate this is. It was the work of slaves or servants to wash your feet. You didn't wash the feet of someone below you in social standing. Remember, back those days, everybody walked everywhere and they wore sandals, so the feet were awfully dirty. And definitely this is not the role of a teacher. Or John is so clear that Jesus is the Son of God. He told us at the beginning of his gospel, Jesus was there when the entire creation took place. This is God incarnate who was there when the universe was created, when our world was created, when the oceans and the land was formed, and animals and humans. That same God is bending down, washing the dirty feet of his disciples. Now, people are often still bothered by foot washing. I remember years ago, I was still a young pastor, and I thought it would be a good idea if we tried foot washing at a worship service. And I will always remember my organist at the time, a beloved man named Aaron, and he and I worked really well together. But he got really mad at me on that occasion. He said, thought that was a really awful, dumb idea. He later confessed to me that he had a condition. I didn't even know that this existed. It's called bromodosis, and it basically is really, really stinky feet. there's a condition like this. I later learned that there's actually hundreds of thousands of sweat glands in our feet, and some people's feet can perspire up to a pint a day per foot. And Aaron had that condition, and so there was no way he wanted anybody washing his feet. So he took great offense at this. And I remember saying at the meeting, though, that's the point. Jesus did this demeaning thing to his disciples. Why would he do this? This disgusting work meant only for a servant. He came to Simon Peter. Now, Simon Peter is so wonderful in some ways. He's kind of like the second banana of good teaching. Second banana always sets up the comedian with a good line. Peter is always so kind of dumb that he sets Jesus up in multiple occasions, and that's what he does. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand." This is such a deep statement that Jesus gives. As I'm guessing when Jesus celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples, said, "This is my body and this is my blood and the bread and wine," the disciples probably were kind of like, "What? I don't get it." I think in the same way in this story, they were like, what? I don't get, why are you serving us? But he says, you will come to understand. The next day on the cross, as Jesus is giving his life, being a servant, giving his life away for us, they will come to understand just what he was describing. But Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." He just, again, feels it so inappropriate. And Jesus says, "Unless I wash you, you will have no share with me. You will have no inheritance that I have for you." It's the same word that was used in the story of the prodigal son when the younger son said, "Come and, I want my inheritance." Jesus is saying, you don't have any share, any inheritance, any destiny with me, Peter, unless you receive what I have to give you. I don't think he's talking just about the foot washing. He's talking about what will come on the cross. And Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." It's pretty cool that he wants to receive this, but Peter so typically takes it too far. And Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean." I think he's speaking metaphorically as well there in referencing the cleansing, the forgiveness that will take place on the cross. And he says, "And you are clean, though not all of you," for he knew who was to betray him. For this reason, he said, "Not all of you are clean." Again, it's a little dig on Judas because Jesus knows what's going to happen. After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am." Again, the contrast, not just teacher, but I'm your Lord, and I have treated you as a servant would treat his master. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Jesus commands us to wash one another's feet. And this is really interesting. Most churches celebrate communion on a regular basis. In a lot of churches, it's a weekly celebration. We drink the wine, we eat the bread. And I wonder, but why don't we wash feet? In 1/4 of the Gospels, we're told to wash one another's feet. I think both physically and certainly metaphorically. I wonder if we're much more comfortable with communion because there's the receiving of all that Jesus has given us, but it doesn't have the dual message of what we've been given and also what's required of us to be serving. Doesn't it seem like every 4th Sunday we should be washing each other's feet? But Jesus continues, for I have set you an example. He has demonstrated what it is to be a servant, that you also should do as I have done to you. We are called to be servants as well. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the ones who sent you. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. What an amazing description Jesus gives us to wash one another's feet, to be a servant to one another. You know, if we had gathered in person for worship, I would have been tempted to have replaced the offering plates with a wash basin. Because that's one way that we are servants. We take our finances and we give them away. It blesses ministries of the church. It blesses other charities and causes that we believe in. It's one way that we are serving. I would have used that. I'm so grateful, by the way, for folks who are sending in their offering. Obviously, it's empty and will be because we don't have in-person worship. But folks are still supporting the church, going online and donating. I'm grateful for that. But that isn't the only way, of course, that we're giving. In this coronavirus time, what a wonderful opportunity to remember to be a servant, to check in on somebody else in our community, a neighbor, a friend, somebody you're concerned about. I've been making phone calls and interacting with folks and emails and such. I called one lady the other day. Her health is kind of compromised and wanted to check and make sure she was doing okay. In the course of that conversation, I'll bet she mentioned 5 other people that she had been checking in with, seeing how they were doing, looking out for them. We have this opportunity to metaphorically wash somebody else's feet and serve them. Or maybe you're not a phone call person. You probably got some cards sitting around the house. It's old Christmas cards maybe even. Fill them out. Send some cards. Lift somebody else's day up. And here in our church, we've started a new ministry, and I hope you'd be interested in being a care caller. I'm making calls and connecting with people, but we got a lot of folks in our church. What I'd love is some folks who'd be willing to help out with that, to take a page or two of our church directory and call and make sure that everybody's doing okay, looking out for everybody. While we're stuck at home, maybe you can think about folks in your neighborhood, folks that, you look over and the bushes need to be trimmed, or maybe they didn't get all their leaves up, or maybe there's something you can do to help them out. Somebody, take this time that we have where we're not, maybe not back at work or more limited schedules because of the coronavirus, a chance to look and see how we can bless and take care of somebody else. I know many of our ministries here at church are trying to think, how can we serve? How can we wash each other's feet and look out for people who are in challenging times? We could look at this time of coronavirus and say, oh man, I'm stuck at home, nothing to do. Or we could look at this time and say, how could I be a deeper servant? How could I look out for people who are struggling? How could I care for somebody else? How could I take the spirit of what Jesus did, not physically wash their feet, we want social distancing, but metaphorically wash their feet and serve them, just the way Jesus taught us to do. Let me close with an amazing story that just captures exactly what it was that Jesus was describing. Back in 1996, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, there was a rally, a gathering of the Ku Klux Klan, that group who are so well known for their hatred of people of color and for just their hatred. And as you can well imagine, the folks of Ann Arbor weren't happy about this. And so there was a counter protest against the KKK. And there was a man in the crowd who, from all appearances, was a white supremacist himself. He was wearing a shirt with a Confederate flag, and even more significantly, he had a tattoo that you can see in this picture that's an SS symbol, the Nazi symbol of the Aryan race. And when somebody realized that this guy was dressed and had this tattoo, he was knocked to the ground, and they started attacking him. And a young woman, an African-American young woman named Keisha Thomas, only 18, Keisha dropped to the ground and covered him. She put her body in harm's way for this guy she didn't even know. And she was heard to yell out, "You can't beat goodness into somebody." Right? You can't beat goodness into somebody. You can only serve them. You can only love them. And that's what Jesus demonstrated to us when he washed his disciples' feet and when he encouraged us to have that same humility, that same love. I hope in these challenging times that we live in, and in all times, that we find ways to reach out and serve, to care for those in need, just like Jesus did for us as he washed his followers' feet and as he will ultimately give his life to show us God's love. Amen.